1, 2, and 3 John. So just to give you a little introduction about that, the author isn't named precisely in the text, but is most attributed to John, the son of Zebedee, the disciple Jesus loved. And 2nd and 3rd, because 1st John, it's not actually named in the text. 2nd and 3rd John, it is self-attributed to the elder. Now that could also be John the Evangelist, perhaps a different person, but whoever this John is, they're part of the original Johannine community that was the original disciple, apostle John, and they had a big following, and he had a lot of well-taught disciples and followers that were all in the same manner of teaching that Christ gave him. The earliest identification of him being John, precisely John, came from about AD 150 to 200, and all the early church leaders of that time designated the writer as the Apostle John. So as far as we know, that's who it was, and no one else was suggesting until much, much later theologians that it was anyone other than the beloved disciple, the son of Zebedee, who was with Jesus, who laid on his lap, who had that great intimate relationship with Jesus. So we're confident that that is the author that we're talking about, who is also the author of the Gospel of John too. The grammatical and the language styles are so common that we can say with pretty good confidence that this is the same author, or it's as close as we can get to that. It was probably written in maybe 95 to 110 sort of AD, when John was of old age. The Gospel of John was probably written in AD 85. So it's likely to be after that date that these 3 letters were written, but we're not really that sure. He was probably based in Ephesus. Certainly that's what the early church teachers from a little bit later, that's where they believe from their history that he was. And Ephesus was an important trade city, but it was also a place where there was a mishmash of different philosophies and different religious ideas, all in this one compact region of modern-day Turkey. John was likely overseeing a network of house churches that were probably nearby in the region of Ephesus. And the audience was probably mainly Jewish followers, but they'd had this big theological issue and debate that was causing fractures and splits in the churches, and people were leaving and they were no longer recognizing Jesus as the Messiah and as the Son of God, and they're causing big issues amongst church members and church membership. So this letter, and particularly 1 John, was written as a sort of a new briefing to all of his churches, and it would have been distributed far and wide. And we know from church history that this was even beyond those Johannine churches in Ephesus, because this was in Egypt. This came back out of Egypt not that many years later, and out of all the other regions. So this letter was something that the early church decided was really important for their progress and was well regarded. So the letter was written because there was tension, there was conflict in the churches, there were new ideas creeping into church theology, and there was quite persuasive arguments that were happening and ideas that were causing big problems, and they needed a real response and some real direction that wasn't just for one specific issue that cropped up, but actually this is for a direction now, a measuring rod for everything that was to come, including our generation now. So there was 2 big things that were happening at the time. One was Docetism, where Jesus isn't real, but it was just people were imagining seeing the Spirit of Jesus, but he was never bodily here on earth. And the other one was this whole idea of Gnosticism, which was special extra revelation beyond the teaching of Jesus that he gave to his disciples, that people were having these Holy Spirit moments of God speaking to them, but they were actually made up, and they were trying to get their own way through. They were bringing in other religious ideas, other spiritual ideas into what was happening to try and gain influence within the church. And John was basically saying, this is the way to do it. So the first book of John, John 1, was really a letter of damage control. It reminded the readers that God is with them, and it gave them great encouragement to stay true to what they already believed and had believed. 1 John is really unusual in style compared to a lot of the other letters. It's a poetic sermon of encouragement, and it's very similar in nature to the Gospel of John. It's got a real amplifying nature that goes round and round the main points, building them up and building them up and building them up, all around a couple of main themes. And they're really the themes of life. They're the theme of truth and the theme of love. And its repetitive nature means that you can really build on these issues. And John uses really big contrast, light and dark, life and death, to really make his point in this. So 1 John, 2 John and 3 John, they're all written probably within a few years of each other, maybe even at the same time. It's very hard to tell, and it doesn't really matter to us the precise order or dates that they're written in. They're all addressing the same sort of issue to the same sort of audience in a very particular way. So a little bit of an introduction then to John 2. John 2 is the shortest book in the Bible by way of verses. It's only got 13, and it's written to one specific house church in the region of Ephesus, and it's got some troublemakers in it, and they're troublemakers, they're on their way, and they're going to cause angst, and it's really a warning letter to those people to say what's coming, don't support them, don't give them a platform to try and deceive others, don't give them support, which is quite unusual really, of saying, hey, these guys that are causing trouble, keep them out. 3 John is the shortest book in the Bible by word count. In the Greek, it's only got 219 words, and it's a personal letter to a man named Gaius, recommending to him that a group of Christians led by Demetrius, and it's actually saying, I recommend these guys to you. They've come to preach the gospel in the area where Gaius lived. The purpose of that letter was to encourage and strengthen Gaius and to warn him against Diotrephes, who is refusing to cooperate with John and the missionaries. And John is basically saying, don't listen to him, welcome these guys in. Often these letters, and in the early church, these letters were clumped together. There's a lot of early church evidence of these letters even being one with a package and coming together. And we can almost imagine it like this, that 1 John is a letter to the regional churches, 2 John is to one specific church within that, and 3 John is to a member within a specific church. But they're all originally written to the same region, addressing the same sort of issues with the same author, so from the same heart. Okay, so let's give you a little bit of an overview. So 1 John starts with an introduction, and it ends with a conclusion in chapter 5, and within it there's sort of 2 main kind of sections. So the first one runs from 1 John 5 to chapter 3 verse 10, and then from 3:11 to 5:17. And they both begin with that same sort of message that's got 2 main themes on it. The first one being God is light, and the second one being God is love. And they're 2 great themes in the middle of it. The introduction to John is really similar to the Gospel of John. It's got those same sort of things that feel so familiar, that feel so great as a Christian. They feel strengthening. They remind us of Genesis, and they've got that same idea of God the Father, and he spoke the word of life, and so much of the beginning of John talks about this idea of the witness, and he calls them the we. And actually that's the original apostles that got the teaching from Jesus directly. And that's quite important for him in this book, because when people are starting to have other Gnostic ideas, he's basically saying, we didn't get these from Jesus. They need to stay outside of the church because they're not from Jesus in the way they should be. And he's trying to pass all this truth on to the next generation that he keeps referring to as the you. So when you read 1, 2, and 3 John, look for those words. We, which means the original disciples, the original teaching of Jesus. You, it's something passing on to that next generation. And he wants to say in the middle of this that the we, the original disciples, the original message of Jesus, wants to have this fellowship with you for the next generation. And the Greek word in there is koinonia. If you've studied the Bible at all, you'll know that koinonia is a great meshing of fellowship, real participation together. So back to the overview. First, we had the light, and it's that idea that we saw God's light and now we are sharing it with you. We want you to participate with Jesus, and it's got these great ideas about walk in the light, keep the commandments, and that Jesus' death is enough. And it always comes back to love one another, be in the light. And he's got this great idea in the middle of this, that God's light is in you. And that means that you banish the darkness. It's that total victory idea, because where there's light, there's no darkness. And once light comes, it's illuminated and darkness stops being. And that whole idea that the darkness is then going to go away from all the corruption and the world and all those sorts of things. He's then got this great idea about warning about the anti-Jesus movement that's happening there, and warning about those that have left and don't believe in Jesus. But you know the truth, because you are loved of God, and you show that you love God by being righteous and then loving each other, because he's got this whole idea of light and love blending together. The second half of 1 John is all about love, and it's this idea of love one another, avoid hatred, but the love is defined by Jesus, who actually gave up his life for others and served others. That is the example that we've got. And that whole idea of John really making a deal about Jesus washing people's feet just before he died, that's his love example. And we need to trust in the love of Jesus and actually let that love change us. And then he's got this warning about false prophets. We need to test them. Do they focus on the love of Jesus? Because if they don't focus on Jesus, they're not speaking from God. Because everyone who is a true child of God will focus on Jesus, will focus on his death, that ultimate expression of love, and focus on the resurrection of Jesus. Because on the cross, God is love, and he showed the love that he wants you and me to have, that love that banished every bit of fear, that banished everything away from us forever. And that great idea, and John loves this, and you'll notice the wordplay in this that he uses again, when we realize that God so loved you, then we have victory. Then it becomes our entire life, and it's the faith that we have in Jesus Christ that becomes who we are. We then understand love, and we understand his love, and then we replicate that love. So he's got a concluding part in 1 John 5 verse 20, and it says, we know also that the Son of God has come and has given us understanding, so that we may know him who is true. And we who are in him is true by being his Son, Jesus Christ, the true God and eternal life. So basically, Jesus, God, gives life, and we need to then keep away from anything that distracts us from Jesus. And he concludes the very end of it with, don't make anything an idol. And really, it's all about knowing Jesus is knowing a God of love. So a quick overview of John 2, the second book of John. It's really simple because it's only very short. There is greetings. There is exhortations in verse 9 to 11. Then there's a bunch of warnings, and then he closes the book, and it's very small. The third book of John. Again, it's very short. He's got some greetings. He gives some reasons for writings. He's got the problems with Diotrephes. He introduces Demetrius, and then he closes the book because, again, it's so very short. So I now want to give you some key verses. So my key verse from 1 John is 1 John 4 verse 19. It says, we love because he first loved us. I don't really know what it is that I could possibly say about that, because it's just so simple that actually all the love that we have comes because he died for us, and he loved us even before he died for us. He loved us before he created us, because that is who God is. And that should be such an incredible expression of who we are, that we love Jesus, that we wouldn't want to do anything that takes away from Jesus or his love for us. Okay, my key verse from the second book of John is from verse 6. And it says, "This is love, that we walk in obedience to his commands. As you have heard from the beginning, his command is always that you walk in love." And again, it's a very simple verse that actually we just need to walk in obedience to his commands. That's not try and bend the rules. That's not try and make things fit into our generation. But actually we need to do what we knew, which is the simple truth of Jesus Christ. And we need to do those commands, which Jesus said, love one another, love me. And it's just very simple. That was the command that Jesus gave us. So the third book of John, my key verse is from John 3, it's from third book of John, verse 11. And it says this, "Dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. Anyone who does what is good is from God, and anyone who does what is evil has not seen God." If that isn't very, very black and white, I don't really know what is, because it's just super, super clear that it just simply says, don't imitate what is evil, imitate what is good. And anyone who does good is from God. Anyone who does evil has not seen God. And that's a real challenge to each and every one of us, that we need to be imitators of good things from God. And much as we give grace when people get it wrong, when people are living a lifestyle that isn't getting it wrong, which is what John was particularly addressing, if they're not focusing on the good of Jesus Christ, they're not from God. And so we need to make sure we heed that. Okay, the so now. Well, the so now from 1 John is there's light and there's love in Jesus. And we need to bring the light into focus. And we need to focus on Jesus in every part of our life and actually avoid everything else. So if we're thinking about things that aren't bringing the simple truth of Jesus Christ, his death and his resurrection, his love and his life into focus, it's just not important. Some of those peripheral things that so often can entangle us and other ideas, they are just not important for us. We need to keep Jesus the main thing. That's the so now from 1 John. The so now from the second book of John is actually this idea that our love is dependent on our obedience to God. And when we don't obey, we don't love. And we often get in that idea that our obedience to God only affects ourselves. And actually, it's simply not true. Our actions have effects that are far beyond our own limited vision of the world. So make sure that we're following God right, that we're obeying him, and we're showing our love by obeying God in the right way. The so now of the third book of John is that we need to live and love according to the truth we find in people and in their lives and their daily ministry, and then we need to care for and support them, love them. And actually, we need to be measuring people, and if they're doing it right before God and they're bringing God into focus, we need to respect that, we need to honor that, and we need to help support and love those people that are lifting Jesus high every day. And so the overview of 1, 2, and 3 John is, let's keep it simple. Let's keep loving Jesus and making Jesus the main thing in our lives with the simple teaching that Jesus gave us that's going to reflect love and who he is of love in our life. And that is the book of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John.